Longtime listener, first time caller, John Paradine. Welcome to Second Nature.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, it's great to be here. We've talked about this for a while, and I've been listening to the pod since day one, and really find it super interesting. It's funny. I've never been in the outdoor industry. I've always been in these adjacencies, always somewhat connected to the outdoors. So now getting a firsthand listen to a lot of the details in the outdoor industry, it's really interesting as someone again who doesn't sit in the outdoor industry or an endemic company. So thanks for having me.
This is why you're going to be a great guest because you know I'm all fired up about this cross-pollination thing, and the stuff that you have done is super valuable to the outdoor industry, and the stuff we're going to talk about today I think is going to be really insightful. A lot of the topics that you and I have been kind of lining up for this chat are valuable but not really talked about that often when it comes to outdoor industry topics. So I think there's a lot. And also, I just genuinely am excited for this conversation. I love the origin story of Red Bull. I think a lot of people don't really know the actual details of how it goes. There's, of course, like the Dietrich myth where, he goes to Asia and he's a toothpaste salesman and, finds out about these energy drinks and then brings it back to Europe, blah, blah, blah. But like, that's the overall Red Bull origin story. But the US origin story is a little bit different. And I feel like maybe that's a great place to start this conversation, is to sort of establish your background in marketing and how you kind of came to be in this space. You were there on the day that the first ever can of Red Bull was sold in the United States, which I feel is like kind of a big milestone. Can you just like fill everybody in, like tell the story of how Red Bull got up and running in the States?
Yeah, it's it is a bit of a sordid tale, a little bit. The original guys who Dietrich had sent over to the U.S. To try and build up and do market research, basically got fired for embezzlement. They had set up some fictitious companies, fictitious sampling companies, and they brought another guy over. Guy's name was Hans Vriens, to really kick off the brand in the U.S. I had been working for a beer distributor here locally in San Mateo County prior, and another gentleman that they brought on was a guy Jack Dadham as a consultant, and Jack started building up a team. And one of my colleagues who I used to work with, the beer distributor, he was like, "Hey, do you want an opportunity with this brand Red Bull?" And there's a Red Bull malt liquor also. And I was like, I'm not selling malt liquor. Like I've done that before. And turns out it was Red Bull energy drink, which no one had ever heard of. I got a fax copy of the job listing. That's how long ago it was. So I'll date myself right there. And I went and met with Jack, and he had like 6 cans squirreled away in the corner. And he gave me 1 can and was like, "Try this when you need energy." And I was on my sales route, popped the can open after I had lunch and drank it. And I was hooked since then. It made a believer of me because it did exactly what it said it was going to do. It solved a problem for me, which was me getting tired in the afternoon, after lunch. And that was really the genesis of it. It started from there. We launched in April of '97 in Santa Cruz, California. We also did a test market in Lake Tahoe. But then we slowly started rolling out in San Francisco and the rest of the Bay Area. And it really took off. I mean, we had a very deliberate approach. We only sold 1 case at a time to each retailer. And that was one, we didn't have a lot of product in the country, but 2, it also made the shelves not look full. So when someone came in and bought 1 or 2 cans, by the end of the first week, we were getting calls from our retailers saying, "Hey, this stuff is sold out. I need you to replenish by the end of the week," because we'd only sell them 1 case. So it kind of created this like false demand, a lot of myth building about it. And yeah, it got rocking and rolling pretty early on. Our sales for the first half month in April of '97, 642 cases.
Wow. That's
Yeah,
like
and that's probably a display in some Walmarts today, right? So But yeah, it was a lot of education in terms of educating people as what an energy drink was. No one had any idea. And really just people getting like trying, like, what flavors do you have? No, we only have one flavor. It's Red Bull flavored. It's not really a flavor at all.
It's functional.
It's functional. Yeah. So it was a lot of fun. And we didn't know what we didn't know, right? We had no idea this was going to go on to be a multi-billion-dollar brand just in the US. We all were on this ride and we're like, yeah, this would be fun, see what happens. We got to do cool things and work with cool people and talk about this emerging category or this new category. And but I don't think at the time we really knew what the future held for Red Bull or energy drinks in general. So
When was that moment for you? Because you were at Red Bull for long enough to see the rise. Was there a specific moment where you're like, oh no, this is happening?
actually, one of the funny things is when we first did the distributor launch, beverage distributors normally do their kickoff meetings in the mornings. So then everyone can go and run their routes. We somehow convinced them to do it in the afternoon when everyone was tired, gave everyone Red Bull. And then we threw an after party at our beach house later that night. And the stories the next morning of people coming in saying, I cleaned my apartment, when I got home, my wife was like, "Are you on drugs? Like, what's going on?" So we knew at that time we had something special because that was literally the first day. But I think when we started putting on our own events and people started coming, and there was just this massive uh, awareness of what Red Bull was, and people would attend because it had the name Red Bull on it, because we didn't do it all the time. It was very rare that we put our name on something. So we did a street luge event in San Francisco when street luge was still a thing, and in North Beach, and we had like 10,000 people show up on a Saturday afternoon, and we did barely any marketing around it. So we knew we had something pretty special then. And also when retailers were calling us, when distributors were calling us, you kind of knew you had something special when there was a lot more inbound calls than us trying to really dig up, like, or kick the can down the road and really try and get business. We had more business than we knew what to do with. So
Those events were typically run by the eventual field marketing manager, which you became. When was that transition? Like, you started out as sort of the distribution side of things and kind of getting the sales up and running, but how did you switch over to sales, or sorry, marketing from there?
yeah, after we started doing some local events, supporting other people's events first, and then coming up with some Red Bull event concepts, we realized pretty quickly that we needed a team dedicated to just the marketing side of it. And in Europe, they had, I don't know if they called them musketeers at the time, but they had field marketing people. It wasn't called that, but they had people who were dedicated to putting on events and working with athletes and running the sampling programs. And when we started in the US, it was a very sales based organization. And as we grew, we realized that we needed to build out that marketing side. And that's when we came together to talk about field marketing and what is that going to look like, and what are their responsibilities going to be, and who's going to do what, and what areas do we need to cover. How does that relate to sales and the goals that the sales team has. So that was probably, I don't remember the year, but it was probably 99 ish, 98, 99. So 2 years after we launched, because we had done a couple of small events. The Street Luge event turned into be a really big event. Our claim to fame was that we beat X Games to San Francisco to do a Street Luge event. And the head of X Games at the time came to see our event. And the differentiator was ours was a straight drag race down a street, but it had a jump in it, just naturally through the curves of San Francisco. Guys on their street luges were catching air. And that really was like I remember the head of X Games at the time turned to his assistant, was like, we are not putting a jump in the X Games. There is no way. Because they did theirs out by the Cliff House. It was a good course, but very mellow. So that was kind of really when we knew when X Games is showing up at your events, then we knew there was something special. So that's really when we started building out the field marketing program. And it was really running local events, third party sponsorships, consumer collecting, which was the sampling. We started building out the student brand manager program at the time, which was bringing brand managers onto college campuses, working with local media because we were buying a lot of radio at the time. So we worked with our local radio stations a ton. So yeah, there was like 5 or 6 different segments of the job, and then those have morphed and changed over the years.
It's wild to think about. Everything you just listed off didn't really exist in America at that stage. Like brands putting on branded events, companies sampling out their product, and not, sure at events, but like going out into a market and handing out, everywhere you go. The collegiate brand manager thing was not a common thing. I mean, everything that you just listed off, Red Bull was sort of pioneering. That must have been an interesting position to be in, where not only were you executing something that hadn't been executed before, but you're hiring people and then trying to explain to them what their job is going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. The sampling team wasn't, that was a little bit easier because we had, well, the original car was the Suzuki XC90, right? So we had these god awfully ugly cars, and then obviously it morphed into the minis later on. That one was a little bit easier because people got the concept of sampling. They would go to events, and we were like, no, now we're going to take you and you're going to go find construction workers and hand them a can, or you're going to go find people standing in line at a club and hand them a can. So that one was a little bit easier. The student brand manager program was a little bit harder just because we were trying to find kids who were super involved with their activities at college campuses, but also who wanted to learn business and marketing. And, basically everyone thought of it as like, oh, you're just going to they're just going to go throw parties. And it really was more than that. It was really a mini business lesson about how do you introduce a brand to a specific target consumer? How do you build relationships? How do you put on small events or sponsor events? So if the student brand manager did it right and they took it seriously, they got a really well-rounded crash course in marketing. If they didn't, they threw some really cool parties, and which was fine. It served our purposes, and they introduced Red Bull to college kids, which was fine. I remember there was a kid at Stanford, right? He was president of his fraternity, it's Stanford, right? Super high achiever. And he got flown to go to New York to an interview for an internship with a financial company over a summer. And he gets back and he's like, yeah, the only thing they wanted to talk about was Red Bull and what I do for Red Bull and like the business of Red Bull. And he's like, I didn't know what to tell him. So it was just funny that these Wall Street folks, that this kid ended up going and probably working for a hedge fund. He had this amazing resume and all they wanted to talk about was his student brand manager career at Red Bull and what he did. So
it's interesting with the student brand manager being very similar to the field marketing manager, where you sort of have this network of people that you work with, which at the time was called opinion leaders, which is a really interesting concept. I actually remember one of my first trainings after I got hired at Red Bull, someone was explaining to me what the opinion leader network was, which was just like all the people you have in your phone, like your network is your net worth, right? And I remember seeing it formalized like that in a PowerPoint slide and feeling like, wait, I was an opinion leader. Yeah. Wait, is that why they gave me free Red Bull all the time? And it was a really weird feeling to be like, oh man, I was like on someone's PowerPoint. That's weird.
Well, you made the jump from athlete opinion leader to behind the curtain and understanding like how the sausage was made. We had another gal, Jamie Simon, who was a really rock star pro kayaker, and she super smart, made the transition from being a pro kayaker. And she came on board as one of our FMMs for Sacramento Tahoe. And I remember sitting in like business meetings with her and like the light bulb just going on in her head, like, oh, there's actually like a whole other world that I, as an athlete, had no idea about. It's interesting when you see that, when you get the peek behind the curtain and understand there is a business to it. And as the business moved along, we got much more formalized in terms of our business practices and structure. And in the early days, it was definitely was, the Wild West.
Super wild, but definitely got formalized. There was a method to the madness, which, from the outside, I don't think people understood. But then once you got behind the scenes, it was like, oh, I see how it works.
Yeah, even in the early days, there was definitely was a method to the madness. Like I said, just selling that one case of product to accounts instead of doing a buy five get one free deal, which every other beverage that launched would do, or some sort of introductory promo pricing. It really was smart in a way that, like, again, at the time we didn't really think about it, but it was like, oh yeah, we want to create this scarcity model. We want to create this. It wasn't even false demand, a demand that the retailer recognized that there was product moving off their shelves. Because if you sell them 10 cases, and even if they sell 2 cases a week, they have 5 weeks of inventory, which is a lot, right? So for a new brand, so even then there was a lot of thought that went into the launches, like I talked about with doing the distributor kickoff in the afternoon when everyone was tired. So we give them a Red Bull. We didn't always throw parties after, but it was a good excuse to have them come in and be tired and hand them a Red Bull. And again, they feel the functionality of the product. So some stuff was very well thought out. Although there was a lot of trial by fire and what worked and what didn't work. So
I feel like at the core there was at least intention,
yeah.
right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we've kind of talked about the sales, now the field marketing, and then sports marketing is sort of the next thing to get sort of flipped on. And you had a big hand in that. What was it like in the early days of Red Bull sports marketing?
Yeah, so for sports marketing, it was two sides. It was the event side of it, and then there was also the athlete side of it. I mostly worked on the event side of it with a little bit of athletes thrown in. And we had always had an athlete roster, some European athletes who had been signed, but they were based in the US. So you talked about Robbie Nash on a podcast recently. So Robbie was one of our early Red Bull athletes that was, got handed over to the US. Shane McConkey was another one. And so we had a roster of athletes, and then we had this pitch book of all these other athletes that we would show that were like, oh, Zeno Muller, who was a crew guy from Switzerland. Oh, he would live in every community like Seattle, Portland, San Francisco. We're like, oh yeah, Zeno trains in Portland on the Willamette or whatever. So we always had a roster of athletes, and then we got into really building up the U.S. athlete roster. And it was a bit of a struggle at first because the U.S. is so different than Europe. Because in Europe, they would have local heroes in Germany or in Switzerland or Ireland. And, you couldn't really do that in the U.S. because if you were a national athlete in the U.S., you really were on a much higher level. And we weren't playing in baseball or football or any of the traditional sports. So trying to find, an athlete that would resonate across the country was difficult. So we would, again, it was hard to work with national level athletes because it's set up differently than Europe. On the event side of things, we talked about street luge. We did the first Flugtag in the US in San Francisco. We started doing the really big brand building events and a lot of other named events. Again, we were very selective about what we would put our name on. And it was interesting when we first, I mentioned Tahoe as a test market. What we did there was we partnered with a group. You had Todd Barber on a few episodes ago, and he worked with a group that put on the Tahoe Fat Tire Festival. So we title sponsored that. So the year that we were there, it was the Red Bull Tahoe Fat Tire Festival. And then in Santa Cruz, we ran above the line, so radio and TV advertising. And we ran it as a test market to see what was going to have a bigger impact. In Tahoe, we knew that we needed to develop really good relationships with the local community. And that community was really invested in Fat Tire Festival. So we came in as a title sponsor that, whereas Santa Cruz, still a lot of visitors, but there really wasn't that signature event. So we tried to take an approach where we would look at different opportunities and what would make sense for us. We got out of the title sponsoring other people's events game pretty quickly and just really focused on building and developing our own signature Red Bull events, whether they were a small skateboarding event or something like a Flutog.
The thing that's the most interesting, even now, years and years later, is that when you talk to someone who never worked at Red Bull and they want to emulate Red Bull, they also are looking for the ROI on emulating Red Bull. And it's different at Red Bull. Can you talk about what ROI even means in a brand like that?
Yeah, we didn't know what the word ROI, the acronym ROI was. It was definitely a spend to build the brand. And I've sat with so many people who like, I want to do it just like Red Bull. I'm like, okay, do you have $100 million in the bank and 4 years to build the company and the brand before someone in Austria is going to come knocking at the door saying, hey, where's our return on investment? It really can't be done the way, unless you have really deep pockets and a long-term vision and commitment to build enduring company. Um, there really wasn't a lot of ROI conversation back in the day. It was more about, is this the right thing to do? And of course, everyone thought we had these massive budgets, and we actually didn't. We had very actually small budgets, but those small budgets drove creativity and drove relationships with the local heroes, the local opinion leaders, and really ultimately was giving it's going to sound cliche, but giving their ideas wings, right? That's how we would pitch it. And the best ideas didn't come from us at Red Bull. They came from our network and our athletes or our DJs or whoever we worked with. So yeah, ROI was not necessarily a thing that we focused a lot on in the early days.
I really want to dig into this because, we've been sort of circling around this idea of how the field marketing style organization differs. And those DJs, the athletes, the artists, the people that make up the community have such an outsized impact. And when you go into a project with intention, when you go into a great idea and give it the support that it actually needs, that's when you see actual results. When you go into it with ROI as your number one thing, typically you don't get ROI and you don't get the brand growth either. And it's difficult to convince someone to invest in something where they can't get an immediate return. And especially nowadays, I feel like everything out there is just a math equation of like, okay, if I spend $1,000 on this, I'm going to get 5 back. Right. And it's like, I mean,
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't it and field marketing in general is really hard to put an ROI on. It's the number one question that I've gotten in my career as I've talked to other leaders, looked for other jobs, built out field marketing teams. And I kind of have this, I say, canned response, but it's like a blend of art and science. Yes, there has to be data, there has to be ROI calculations that you can do on certain things, but at the end of the day, the other side of it is the art side is, are we doing it with the right communities for the right reasons? Are we going in, and the term authentic has become overused and kind of trite these days, but are we being authentic to that community? And you don't need to be everywhere. You just need to find the communities that are important to your company and your brand and really just be genuine with them. And that's really where I think the ROI comes from in that long term. And you have to have a long term horizon with field marketing. I sat with a CEO one time and he was like, I was like, what's your goals for field marketing? You want me to build out a team? And he wanted to drive top level brand awareness. And I was like, I stopped him right there. I'm like, sorry, wrong tactic. Like, you can take this budget and put it into other things and achieve your goals way quicker than I'm going to be able to achieve your goals for you. And in a year, you're going to be disappointed because I'm not achieving that. So I think it's just understanding what field marketing does well and where it comes into play and where other tactics in the marketing mix are better. But yeah, the holy grail of field marketing is ROI, and it's gotten better. There's definitely a lot of tools out there that you can use these days. But at the end of the day, to me, it's still a blend of art and science. Are you there with the people feeling the right thing? The Austrians used to say if they could get in a cab in San Francisco and ask the cab driver what was going on that weekend, and if they told them that Flugtag was going on, that was their gauge that we had done a good job. Not that all the people had showed up, but it was just that the people who didn't show up knew about it.
On a handful of events that I did, I'd already sold out the event, and they're like, keep marketing it. And I'm like, but why? It's already sold out. And they're like, no, we want everyone to know.
It's one of the hardest things to get people to understand that. I worked for Sierra Nevada for a long time, and we did these amazing Oktoberfest events in Chico, and they would sell out immediately. And I would say, well, let's continue to market it in Sacramento and San Francisco and other Northern California drive markets. And people are like, why? I'm like, because it shows people that we're doing really cool things. It's not just another beer ad. It's not just another beer placement. And it was interesting when I first started, when they were like, well, why would we do that? And it was the same conversation, like, because we want to show our consumers that we've got cool stuff going on. And yeah, are a lot of people from the Bay going to make the 3-hour drive to Chico? Probably not. But at least it puts it in their head when they walk into that store and they see a 12 pack of Oktoberfest. They're like, oh man, I missed that event. I saw all the videos and the photos of it. We're going to go to it next year. Or they know somebody who went to Chico State and they can talk about it. So that's, we always did that at Red Bull too. Like no matter what, Street Luge event, we get a couple thousand people, but we would blanket the city just so people knew that we were doing something cool.
That was always how I used to explain it to people too, of like, look, I don't expect you to go see Red Bull Rampage and then immediately buy a can of Red Bull. But the next time that you're tired and you're in a 7-Eleven and you're in front of that case, you're probably going to grab a Red Bull because you're like, I love what these guys do. I love this brand. I need energy anyway. And I saw this thing that they did and that was cool. I'm going to support that with my dollars. And it's not sometimes an immediate thing, which is why ROI is essentially impossible. But that brand love, that excitement about what the brand's doing. And when you do get the opportunity to support, why would you pick a Red Bull off the shelf versus any other competitor? I just like the stuff that they're doing. If I'm going to buy an energy drink, I may as well buy the one that I like.
Badge value, right? You want to be seen holding that can of Red Bull. It's like Heineken. Why was it always in green glass bottles? Because they knew, and it wasn't on draft because forever. Same thing with Corona, because people were like, oh, it's a status symbol to have that, right? So same thing with a Red Bull. You're signaling to people with any brand that you put on, right? You wear Patagonia, you wear Marmot, you wear, there's a very specific brand that people align with, and some people want to be associated with that brand, and other people, I have like, that is the polar opposite of who I want to be. So I'm not going to associate myself with that brand.
So we've talked a little bit now about field marketing, and you made a comment about, like that not being the right tactic for the specific brand that you're talking to. What would be your best case scenario where you'd be like, oh my God, this needs to have a field marketing organization to support it? Like, is there a set of, or a scenario where that makes a ton of sense?
I think there's a couple different scenarios. One, it is a low cost way to build relationships with a very specific consumer group. So I would say if you are a brand that has a very defined target market, like field marketing, experiential, being in the mix with those consumers and building that relationship with them. Again, you don't need to spend a ton of money. I think that is one scenario where it makes a ton of sense to be connected to that consumer on a much deeper level. The other one that I've got an example from is I worked for a plant-based yogurt company for a year, a little over a year, and built out a field marketing program. And as soon as you said the word vegan yogurt or plant-based yogurt to someone who wasn't in the plant-based community, their eyes would gloss over and be like, no way, like, I don't want to even try it. It's going to taste like cardboard. So we would sample people, and we would do it at WeWorks. We would do it at a lot of like really unique places. And people would be like, oh, this is great. We'd build parfaits with granola and fruit. And people would try the yogurt like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then we would tell them that it's plant-based. And they were just like shocked that, wait, this tastes as good as my, Dannon yogurt that I buy 10 for $10. Like, yep. And then so people would latch onto it, not because of the part because it was vegan or because it was plant-based, but because the taste was on par and the ancillary benefits were way better because it was literally 4 ingredients. It was almonds, some sugar, fruit flavor. So to me, I think there are certain brands that you need to overcome that barrier to entry that may exist. And the only way that you're going to do that in many ways is that hand to hand combat, like getting out there and sampling people and educating them and talking to them about it. Honestly, it goes back to the early days of Red Bull. If we just put an energy drink on the shelf, people had no idea what an energy drink was. So they were just going to pass by. Most people thought it was beer. We had stories of people getting pulled over because they were drinking it and cop thought it was beer. And, silver, small blue can. And you're like, oh no, it's an energy drink, non-alcoholic. So again, I think there are certain products that really lend itself to that experiential. But I think field marketing works best when it's layered with other things. Like it can't be the only marketing tactic that you're doing. And it could be something as simple as targeted social, which is now, super easy to pick out a geographic area and say, hey, we're just going to target, skateboarders in this community or hikers in this community. And you spend $50. Again, you're running an awareness campaign, but it's very low lift. And that's where I think field marketing really starts spinning that flywheel that you guys talk about all the time when it's done in conjunction with other things.
I think that conversational element goes such a long way. The conversation and the relationship. And now a lot of the video-based social platforms, I mean, that is the bread and butter of what is highly performing is somebody looking into the camera and just explaining to you like, hey, this little blue and silver can does this thing for you. And if you feel like this or you need this or whatever, this is the thing that's going to do it for you. I mean, that's basically all of Instagram ads in a sentence, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's one layer to that. I think the in-person, I'm still a really big believer in IRL and being with consumers in the moment when they're feeling something visceral, whether it's at a music festival or at a sport event or just anywhere. To me, you can't replicate that. I think you can amplify that, and I think you can layer it with digital. But I think to me, at the heart of it, that IRL is really, really important.
Yeah, and I think the layer that also comes with that is just the relationships that you're able to build through those IRL events. And IRL events just seem to be picking up steam again after a couple of years of everything being shut down. Everybody's trying to get back out and reconnect and really have these moments. So I think I see a lot of brands sort of pivoting back into, everything that everybody I talked to last year is like, what are you doing for in-person stuff? Like, we know you have a YouTube channel and an Instagram and whatever, but like, what about where are you going to be? Like, who are you going to be connecting with in real life? And for me, I'm kind of scratching my head a little bit like, well, I can talk to 10 people at once or 10,000 people at once. Which one do you want?
Right.
But I can see the value being placed on these smaller, more intimate, more relationship-based discussions because they just hold more weight overall. And you can have a back and forth that's a lot more meaningful than just like spamming the comment section.
Yeah, and I think it also makes that connection that you can't get any other way. And I think, to me, one of the best things about the podcast with you and Dylan is you guys show your personality and talk about other things. And, you talked about taking your son on the road trip and going to China with your family. Like, as a listener, like those are the things that I want to hear. Like, I don't need to know everything about people, but it is interesting when you get a little bit of a glimpse of, oh, this is what this person's really about, and this is who they are. And obviously that happens at real life events as well. And there's so many more tools now to be able to do ROI calculations, like, point of sale. If you're a bag manufacturer, you can sell your bags at events and probably make back what you spent on being there, right? So Square wasn't a thing before, so now you can use that Square and actually have a point of sale location, whereas again in the past it was more just brand building. So there are ways to really kind of close that loop as well if people are really concerned about the ROI on it. But the relationships and the people you'll connect with and them telling you stories about whatever your product is and where they found it and how they love it. Again, that's the stuff that just kind of supercharges an organization too.
Well, I think there's another interesting point to be kind of dug into here because, for larger organizations or even mid-sized organizations that can afford to, kind of go down this road, that's valuable. But what I also think is really valuable is the sort of mindset of the field marketing manager that could apply to literally anyone in either a full-time job or running their own startup or being a content creator or anything like that. And you've been director of field marketing in a lot of different places, which means you've probably trained up a lot of field marketing managers. I have a history as a field marketing manager as well. That was what brought me into Red Bull. That was my first job there. And I remember hearing about from Bill Connors, the first person I ever met within Red Bull, telling me what his job was. And I was like, wait, so you get paid to like basically throw high fives, put on awesome events, find more awesome stuff, and then just tell more people about it. That's your job, right? And I think that when I think about how I interact with the world and how I approach every project that I'm working on, I'm still operating on this field marketing manager system of building relationships, bringing value to the people that I'm interacting with, and finding ways to essentially activate upon all of that. Does that track? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I've been fortunate to build out a number of field marketing programs, and some were more regional based. So you were not looking for someone who was really ingrained in a community. It was more like, okay, you got 5 markets that you got to cover. But for the most part, finding people, and even if you were a local business, just making sure that you're connected to all the things that your customers are doing, and just asking them and understanding, because you never know what that's going to lead to and what opportunities that might bring about. And yeah, that was with field marketing. It was local marketing manager, right? I think that was one of our first titles. And it was all about those local connections and knowing the right DJs, knowing the right clubs, knowing the right athletes, knowing is, ping pong really an emerging sport in this market when it may not be in any other market. And that's why we're going to go do like a cool ping pong activation, and just like understanding what the heartbeat of that community is and what makes it tick. And it doesn't have to be, b-boys and graffiti artists and like something really like that's hard to dig into. It could just be like, my community really loves hiking, right? And so I'm going to go out and do trail magic for them, on the PCT or on a local trail, and just do, or go to a major spot where people start and finish hikes and do something nice for people. Again, it could be as simple as that, just to connect with the community. But yeah, having that local knowledge of all the things that are going on, really important. And I think that is the heartbeat of what the local marketing manager and the field marketing manager was back in the day at Red Bull. And even for our the other programs I built out, that was really the heart of it, was who do you know in your community, and how can we work with them to bring whatever the brand was to life in a credible and authentic way, where we really can add value as opposed to just wanting to throw money at something.
Yeah, it really came down to this concept of like, how can I best support the people that I find the most interesting and most valuable to the things that I care about? And I want to be present in this scene more than anything. I mean, a lot of the field marketing managers, myself included, got dropped into markets. I ended up in Cincinnati, Ohio as my first job. I think I'd maybe been to the zoo there once, but I'd never really spent a lot of time other than like the zoo and the Red Stadium. I hadn't been to Cincinnati. I didn't know what Gold Star chili was or any of that stuff,
Yeah.
right? But like, yeah, you get dropped in and you're like, okay, what does everybody here care about, and how can I support that? And by being a supportive figure and being present and building relationships, I can then figure out how best to add on to that. And I think, I mean, even using second nature as an example, right? Like we've been in the industry for a while. Dylan and I always talk about like being a practitioner first, but then we wanted to think about, well, how can we, add fuel to the fire? How can we support people? And so if we've got a podcast, well, we could bring people in to help them get even more visibility for the things they're doing. We could connect the community in the Slack channel. That might be interesting. What are the ways that we can come in and be valuable and be a contribution to the whole thing? And it really felt the entire time I was in that FMM role was about contribution, not, taking stuff. And Red Bull made it easy because they weren't asking me what the ROI was, but also that was what worked was, hey, just go be valuable. Go do something of valuable to this community, and the rest will figure itself out.
Yeah, we had a guy, Pete Moran, who legend in the Red Bull world and beyond. He moved from West Virginia to Seattle, and he same situation. One of Pete's famous lines that he always used to say was, you've got to, before you invite someone over for dinner to your house, you've got to go to dinner at their house a number of times to build up that relationship. And we would use that as, we're going to go support whatever the community is in things that they're doing before we throw our own party or our own event in that community. And very rarely would we just drop in and be like, hey, we're going to throw this huge skateboarding event without us doing a lot of work to support the skateboarding community in things that were important to them first. So that way, when we did do something, we needed their support, they were all on board because they knew that we were coming in with the right intentions and we had done the work to support their community first.
This is sort of the macro theme that I was thinking about last night when I couldn't sleep because my brain was just like going, of this idea of building something special with your surroundings, right? It's really not about you coming in and having this universal vision of like, this is what's going to happen. It was about using everything within reach to, how do I assemble this stuff to make it something really special and meaningful and intentional. And I think that's sort of like where I kind of want to go next is, what you're doing now with the San Francisco Peninsula, director of marketing of this group. You and I got a chance to work together recently, collaborating on something, but also we were talking about this before of how within range of anywhere that we are, whether we're FMMs in Cincinnati, Ohio, or we're working with the SF Peninsula, or we're content creators, or we're brands, or whatever, there's so much stuff to be uncovered within arm's reach in basically every single direction. And I think if I had to sort of be critical of my time at Red Bull, I don't think that as much as I built relationships, I didn't use everything around me to the maximum level that I could have in these relationships, like the tourism bureaus or destination marketing organizations, or whatever phrase you want to use. There are a lot of things within arm's reach of just about anybody to help you execute what you need to do. And I think relationships is obviously a big chunk of that, but there's a lot of other stuff that could help you make things happen. And that's sort of where this idea of how do you build something special using your surroundings kind of comes from.
Yeah, it's important to, no matter where you are, I think having those relationships with the local community and understanding, again, what makes it tick and how you fit into that community and how are you supporting the community. It's very CPG centric, but like we would always talk about from a CPG standpoint, or consumer product goods, so beverages, other things. We want to own our home turf, right? We don't want someone else to come in and dominate in our backyard. So it goes for any brand, right? If you want to be a shoe manufacturer, or I go back to bags all the time, but if you're like, you want to make sure that when you go out on the trail, or when you go out hiking, or when you go out, you see your product more than you see anybody else's. And it's having that ownership of that local market. And again, being proud of that. And I think so working now, I moved over to this travel and tourism side of things, brand new industry for me. But what I really have uncovered is it's relationships. It's all about relationships. Our CEO has relationships with everyone from mayors down to, the bagel shop owners. And it's really understanding how we can then leverage those relationships. And I don't mean that in a negative way, like in a positive way, to, again, enhance the image of the San Francisco Peninsula and San Mateo County. How do we work with the local community to really showcase all that it has to offer, so that way for us, more people want to come and visit? or they want to spend an extra day when they're meeting at Facebook or Google to go experience the trails that you did, or go on a trail run, or go to some of the great restaurants. So it really is like adding value in a different way, but it is still about building that local connective tissue in the local community and adding value to the community, so they feel like, hey, this group is being additive and not just bring a bunch of tourists here that are tearing up our roads, whatever it is.
This is where it gets like very tactical for the outdoor community and the people who run brands, content, you name it, right? What does it mean from your perspective? Like, what are your KPIs, your key performance indicators? What do you care about as the San Francisco Peninsula when it comes to working with people from the outdoor industry?
Yeah, so for us, our guiding light and our North Star, our main KPI is hotel room nights. It's as simple as that. We need to put heads in beds. All right. That is the gold standard. Everything that we do has to relate back to that ultimate goal. But that could be done in a number of different ways. And a lot of that is going to be done through like larger meetings, larger events, things that I necessarily may not have a lot of control over. But what I can control is creating an image of the San Francisco Peninsula and showcasing the things that are here that are important. That way, when someone comes, they want to come back, or they want to bring their family, or they, like I said, they want to spend that extra day. And each DMO, as you said it, or CVB, Convention and Visitors Bureau, may have a different North Star. Not everyone is the same. So some of them are membership based, where it's a local business can pay a membership. They get listed on their website. They get benefits from that. They get social assets from that. So it really depends on what the goal of the DMO is. For us, we know that we're super heavy in tech and biotech and life sciences, but a majority of our land is protected. So we want to showcase that. We've got quaint little cities on the coast that we want to make sure people know about and care about, because tourism to them is really one of the things that keeps them alive. So for us, it's balancing that with knowing that we have a pretty diverse community in geography, in people. And really for us, it's showcasing that to as many people as we can. But again, every DMO is going to be different. And I would encourage anyone that's out there, if you're putting on an event, even if it's a couple hundred people, or you have a small business and you bring meetings to your community, reach out to your local CVB, DMO. You can usually just Google visit whatever city you're in and you'll find it, because that's typically how they're named. And just talk to them and see what their goals are and explain to them what you're doing. And if there are ways that they might be able to support you, or you might be able to support them. We work with Half Moon Bay Kayak a ton, right? So it's a kayaking outfitter, but we have a lot of people that come in and they want to get into the Pacific Ocean. So we put them on kayaks, right? So again, it could be something as small as that, or it could be, something larger where people are looking for local gifts to buy for their participants in a meeting, because they want to give them something that is very local and it has the local flavor. So I would encourage people to reach out to the CVBs in their market and just get an understanding of what their goals are and how they might be able to support it. I know that for myself, when I was at Sierra Nevada, my team put on a couple of our large national sales meetings. San Diego and Phoenix, never thought once to reach out to the local CVBs in those markets. And now I kick myself, because they may have been able to help with maybe offsetting some costs, or helping us with negotiations with hotels, or offsite expeditions, whatever it was. And we had that was a more significant number, 250 room nights for 3 nights. So, it was a significant piece of business. Now that I'm learning the other side, I'm like, all right, well, that was a mistake. I should have at least rang them up and see what they could do for us.
It's interesting also to think about how it doesn't have to be just content creation or room nights that matters to these people. It could be as simple as like, hey, I'm trying to put on this event, and even if you're not going to like sponsor the event, you probably know the guy to call because he's probably somehow related to what you're doing. And so you can not just be a sponsor, but you could actually be the connector to unlock something, because you're sort of the connection point for the entire community. And there's so much value in that, because most people just don't even know where to start.
Part of our other role is we serve as the film commission for San Mateo County. So anybody who is trying to film a commercial or photo shoot or anything, like, we have those relationships and know how to get permits. We have relationships with a lot of the local organizations and governments. So if there is something that is of benefit, then yeah, again, we may not know, but we may know the right person. Or at least if we say, hey, we're working with the San Francisco Peninsula on this, and it's something that's going to be a community benefit, more times than not, people are going to really take the call, because they're like, oh, okay, they're working with someone locally. And it's not, I call it the plop factor. It's not just some company from the outside plopping into a community, using up its resources, and then leaving with no real community benefit at the end of it.
I think the thing that helped me on the project that you and I did together, aside from the fact that we're homies and I can just call you and ask you questions, was understanding the number one KPI for you. I want to get people to stay in the San Francisco Peninsula, on the San Francisco Peninsula. I want them to stay here. And how can I basically put a pitch together that would be valuable to you, but also serve the purpose of my channel? And I ended up finding a piece of data that basically said mountain bikers stay longer in hotels when they go somewhere to go mountain biking, which was sort of like the perfect thing, where I want to tell a mountain bike related story. I want to help you accomplish your goal of getting people to come to the San Francisco Peninsula and stay there. But then also I've got this little hook that's like, oh, they're going to stay longer if they come for mountain biking, which was like the perfect way to put this whole thing together to sort of justify a project like this.
Yeah, it was a great data point to bring to my leadership and say, this is why we're doing it. And it really goes back to what we've talked about earlier. Like, we knew this is a long-term horizon thing, right? I don't expect that from your video people are going to smash the book now button, tomorrow, right after it dropped. We know that it's more of a long-term play, to showcase the trails that you did, and to say, hey, there's more here than what most people would think of Silicon Valley, right? But it is great to see, like, in the comments, like, oh, I live here. Thanks for highlighting these. B, now I'm going to plan a trip to this area. Again, it got people thinking about different places to ride than here. Everyone goes to Marin and Santa Cruz. Those are because they're the meccas, right? Like, Marin is the birthplace of mountain biking. Santa Cruz is where most of the companies reside and the best riding. But there's a little spot in between that, on your way down, don't forget about us.
And I think one of the other important elements was that we incorporated some of the other non-cycling stuff that was like, here's the bigger picture of what there is to offer here. And so probably in terms of that evergreen level of content of like someone might be looking for something other than the trails in the area, we offer a little something different, and also just give more context to it, because I think that's it. Like, you're trying to tell the story of like how rich this area is, not just in trail riding, but all these cool like histories and mysteries. And if we can really nail that one down, there's something really cool to be sort of unlocked here.
Right. That was the whole thing. I mean, if it was just going to be a straight shred mountain bike video, we probably wouldn't have had a lot of interest in it. I would have helped you out, but it wouldn't have been really that appealing to us, because it doesn't tell the story of the peninsula. And, now watching it back, I'm like, God, I wish there was so much more. There's so much more that we can tell. And we're looking forward to doing the next version. Maybe it's trail running or kite surfing or some of the other sports that we have to offer here. But yeah, it has to be that well-rounded vision, not just, we're going to come film a mountain bike video. Because there's, like you said, I mean, there's hundreds. I mean, the Pacific Trails have been covered hundreds of times. But has there been anyone who ended up at that Taco Bell or stayed at the Oceana or went to Soul Grind, right? And really told that story about the other things you can do in that community. And that's the stuff that really has an impact, because you're spending dollars locally that are really going to, again, change someone's life. I mean, the Soul Grind Coffee is a locally owned coffee shop. The Taco Bell, obviously, a little bit not so much.
Can't skip that one though.
But you can't skip it. We had a writer from Foders Travel that came in, and she based her whole story around about the peninsula around that Taco Bell. While she highlighted a ton of amazing things, that was what she had decided that what her hook was, and that's how she sold it to her editors, and that's how it got published. So we'll use what we have. But again, if you're thinking about reaching out to a CVB, if you're a content creator, think about the holistic story that you want to tell. Aaron did a great job of understanding what our KPIs were and how he could craft that story in a way that was true to his audience and your audience, but also tell the story that we wanted to tell, which was, again, beyond the bike. And I think the Bourdain on bike comment, that's exactly what you aspire to get to. So, and,
Yeah.
we have a lot of content creators that come in that are that do food blogs and food. That's where this whole idea starts. Like, well, if we're bringing foodies in to do these food tours, what are the other things that we have to offer here that we can bring content creators in and have them showcase this area in a holistic manner, as opposed to just the foodies.
It was such a fun project, and I threw everything I had at it. We had Ryan Thrower, who's the producer of this podcast, there to shoot photos. Paige, Michael, actually the guy who edited it, Michael Stringfield, has this thing where he always wants to make someone cry every time he puts a video together. And so I think it was like your COO said it brought like a tear to her eye.
Yeah.
He was like, check done, I did it.
Yeah, it was. It got great. It's gotten great response, and internally as well. I mean, honestly, it was a big win for me because only being here 6 months, I'm doing things a little bit differently than most of the other directors of marketings of CVBs. But again, I think that's another really important thing. Just because you're not in an industry, I started this whole conversation saying I've never been in the outdoor industry, but I've always been on the peripheral of it. And I think bringing that different mindset isn't a bad thing sometimes. So people get tunnel vision where it's like, no, I have to have somebody who knows running or hiking or footwear or something else in the industry. Yeah, it's okay sometimes to bring somebody from the outside and get a different perspective. You might hear some hard truths as well about what your brand really means to people outside of your core community, but also that could help you really grow.
Well, thank you for the collaboration. That was like a dream project for me and something I've been wanting to do for a while. It was funny how the whole thing kind of came off because when you first got this job, we called each other and had like the same, like, I've got an idea. Yeah. And it turned out to be basically the same idea.
Yeah.
So happy to get, sort of a proof of concept out into the world and kind of hopefully show other, DMOs and CVBs like what is possible and where this whole thing could go. And it is evergreen content. Like that video is going to be relevant until the end of time, basically, because those trails are hopefully not going anywhere. They're protected. The restaurants are the old standbys. There's something that you could Google today or in 5 years and still get a lot of value out of that video. So I'm super encouraged that the view count's already in the 5 figures. The short form content, I think, just broke 100K total so far, which we collabed on. Actually, the newsletter that I sent out, because I send out a newsletter every week to Mountain Bike Ones. I did a special edition of the newsletter that actually has a higher open rate than any other newsletter in the last 63 newsletters I've opened. So actually outperformed basically everything else I'm doing. So more of that to come, hopefully. But thank you for the collaboration. And I used this San Francisco Peninsula video as a BPC in a previous episode. So we're going to have to completely start fresh on BPC. And since you're the guest, I'll let you go first.
Okay. So my BPC is something that you're really probably very familiar with. You use Trail Forks, right?
Uh-huh.
Do you know about Trail Karma?
Trail Karma? No.
So Trail Karma is a feature in Trail Forks that you could then go back and donate to. So you went on a mountain bike ride at El Corte Madera. I'll use that as an example. The association that takes care of the trails there is the Mid Peninsula Open Space District. You open up Trail Karma on your after you've completed your ride. You go to Trail Forks, you go to Trail Karma. It's kind of buried in there. I've had conversations with the Pink Bike folks, and like, you got to get this a little bit more love. And this is why I'm doing it as my BPC. And right from there, you could donate $3, $5, $10, whatever you want to that trail organization. It goes directly to them. They take no cut. They take no fees. So that trail organization gets that $5 or $10. And to me, it's just a very simple way to give back to the trails that we're using on a daily or weekly basis. A lot of the trails here, there's no parking fees, right? So they're not collecting any money. And it's just a simple way to, again, give back. So I try and talk about Trail Karma as much as I can whenever I talk to people, because it's like, it's just, again, it's an easy way to donate to a local organization that's really providing the trail networks that we all enjoy. So Trail Karma in Trail Forks, it's a little hidden. So if you got to dig for it, and it's only available on the desktop version, not the mobile version. But yeah, check it out.
We got to hit up our buddy Robin Thurston to make that more
Yeah,
visible.
It was the pet project of the founder of Pink Bike, and he was very protective of it, and not, because when I was at Sierra Nevada, we proposed doing kind of a matching where, the first $25,000 that was pledged over a given time period, we would then match it. And there was everyone loved the idea, but they have so many different things going on at Pink Bike that it was just hard. And then with the acquisition, it just kind of fell off. But it's something I try and use when I remember. If it was built into the app a little bit better, it'd be much easier. But I have to remember when I come home, go on Trail Forks, go to Trail Karma, and drop some money.
That's really cool. I'm gonna go scope that out. I probably there's a few trails I should probably give some karma to.
Right. I mean, we might support it in other ways, but it's again, I think about it in my parking fee, right? It's $5 to park anywhere you go. So if I drop $5 on after each ride, or if I forget, I'll do $25 or $20.
Yeah.
So anyway.
All right, my BPC, I may have mentioned this on a previous podcast. I don't know if it was part of a BPC or if I just did it offhand. But because this is the first podcast a lot of people will probably hear in 2025, I think it comes out like the first Friday of the year. I have this book that I read called The War of Art. This is written by Stephen Pressfield, and it's a pretty short book. If you're on YouTube watching this thing, you can see it's not very thick. But this is the book that I start every single year reading. I just bang this one out the first week of the year. I've done it through Audible a few times too, but usually just try to go like the book version. And The War of Art basically is a book in 3 different parts, and each page is like a quick thing. It's not like, all the way through. And it basically, the first part of The War of Art talks about this concept of the resistance. And the resistance is anything that gets in your way. It could be an excuse, it could be fear, it could be lack of confidence. Anything that holds you back from accomplishing a goal is now categorized as the resistance. And so you have to like name it to tame it. And then the second half of the book, or the second part of the book, really kind of is like, okay, now that you've identified, here's how you're going to overcome the resistance. And then the third part of the book is like, okay, now here's what you do once you get past the resistance. And this guy's a pretty well-known writer, and he's actually written some movies, and he's done all kinds of things. He's been very successful. He's also failed a lot. And so you get kind of his story as a writer, who, like writers, I feel like have, writer's block and all kinds of resistance. So a writer who's figured out how to identify and deal with things that are holding him back. It's a really powerful book. It's a super, super easy read, but The War of Art is like, honestly, like of the books that I recommend and have like bought for other people, it's this book and The Daily Stoic. Those are like the 2 big ones that like anybody within arm's reach of me has at least one copy of.
I thought you were going Daily Stoic, because I know that's your go-to for the beginning of the year as well. So I figured that was the other one. So
The Daily Stoic is an everyday read, so it's for
Yeah.
each day of the year. There's like one page. We're Kara and I've been reading it, I think, for 6 or 7 years now, like every single night. And of course, there's like the obstacle is the way is kind of like the way into it. But yeah, that whole Stoic philosophy thing, I think, is really helpful. And War of Art's a good supplement to that as well. So highly recommended.
Call back to a previous pod.
So many good books out there, and obviously I'm a huge nerd when it comes to just like trying to learn as much as I possibly can. So this one has been extremely helpful.
It's been interesting to see the traction in the Slack channels, especially around the reads
Mm-hmm.
section. I admittedly am not a huge reader, but there's definitely been a few books that have popped up in that I'm like, okay, I really probably should go get this one and knock it out. So yeah, no, if you're not in I'll plug the Slack channel. If you're not in the Slack channel, definitely sign up, jump in. Some really great discussion in there around just all sorts of topics. So
Yeah, and a big
thanks for
shout.
putting that together.
Yeah, actually, we got to give Ming a shout out. Ming has basically collected every single book that's ever been mentioned on the podcast, and it's made a list within that. There's like a reading list within the Slack channel that you can go through and see the name of the book, where it was mentioned.
Oh.
It's pretty dialed. And also related, I think we finally guilted Matt Sharkey into reading Barbarian Days. I got a picture of him holding it, so I think he's read it, but I need to double check that one.
You're gonna give him you're gonna make him write an essay on it like he's back in school.
I think we should get him on the pod to just like tell everyone else about his experience reading it. It is a pretty fantastic book.
Oh, that's awesome.
I digress. John, thank you so much for being on the pod. You've been on my dream list of people to be on the pod to just share all the history as well as just like how we might think about this sort of concept of being in the field as literally any job, any position, any situation. There's just so much to kind of pull from that of like being, bringing value to things and really just like making life better for everybody. I don't know. There's a lot to dig into there.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that, and my last comment will be, and if you are a brand manager or on the brand team or sit in an office somewhere and you do have folks who are out in the field, go spend some time with them. Go overhear the conversations that they're having about the product, about the company. It's super enlightening. And even for myself, when I get a chance to get back out, if I'm helping someone out at a project or an event, and the comments that come from the consumers, it's really, really, it's better than any brand work you can do. It's really worth the half day, full day out in the field with the team. Again, listening to the direct consumer feedback. So it's my plug to get out of the office and get out with your field team.